overall, it sounds like the platform is kind of on the right track to make good on a lot of the plans that it's been laying out. And I think we also have to remember that a lot of the investments that it's made recently in its revenue products really happened in Q1. So it'll take some time for them to really just pay off.
Hey gang, it's Monday, May 10th. Jasmine, Nazmul and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus and today I'm joined by two people. We have our senior analyst covering global trends. It's Jasmine Emberg.
Hey Marcus, hey everyone.
Hey Jasmine, thanks for joining us. We're also joined by one of our forecasting analysts. It's Nazmul Islam.
Hello everyone, happy to be here.
Hey buddy, thank you for being here as well. Today's fact, snails can actually sleep for up to 3 years. That's not even the crazy part, okay? Because after finding that out, my first thought was, well, how long do they live? Because they're little creatures, can't live that long. Some live for about a year, others for about 2 to 3 years, and the big ones can live past that. So basically, the average snail, couple of years. So they're sleeping their whole lives. That's like a 13-year-old kid going to bed and being like, good night, I'll see you when I'm 60. How crazy, what are they doing? That's too long to sleep. If I get 10 hours, I'm all over the shop. Don't know what's gone on. Anyway, today's topic, Twitter. How have they been doing at the start of the year? So, we're talking about Twitter today. Oh God, I did it again. Blind panic. We are talking about, this is Twitter. This is the Twitter episode, okay? Let's get that straight. I thought it wasn't for a second, but it is. If it's not, I don't care. I've prepped for Twitter. That's what we're talking about. Twitter, highlights, users, and revenue. Let's talk about users first. How did they do in Q1? The highlights. Twitter approached the 200 million mark. So close, just shy of 200 million monetizable daily active users. They registered 199 million in Q1. They added 7 million new folks. That's half of what they added in Q1 2020. By region, it's an 80-20 split. International, US. 80 international, 20% US is the share splits. 38 million users, US users recorded in Q1. That's up 1 million. That 1 million for the quarter has been the story for a while. And then 162 million international users. That's up just over 6 million, half of what they added last Q1. So they're the highlights. Jasmine, I'll start with you. What jumps out to you about how Twitter did in Q1 with regards to users?
So I've actually got one other usage stat that stood out to me that I want to share with you. And I'll warn you, Marcus, I'm doing it partly for selfish reasons, but also because it is important to our listeners. But
okay.
The stat...
She's got an agenda.
I do. The stat is that 1/3 of new users followed topics during sign up in Q1. And this makes me really happy because I believe when we last spoke about Twitter reinventing itself, topics was the one product feature we discussed that I said was very likely to succeed. And it sounds like it is actually helping drive usage and engagement on the platform, which is, of course, what their MDAUs are really measuring. And it seems it's doing that because it's helping users find the stuff that they're most interested in more quickly and easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did. We went through a lot of different things that Twitter's working on, from topics to spaces, social audio, efforts, tipping, all those kinds of things. And it was up there as one of the things you said would definitely help them out. Nazmul, how about you? What stood out to you?
The main thing is that we thought that Twitter's big boost in 2020 in terms of usage growth was driven by all the news and politics and everything else going around the world. But now that we see them sustaining at least a decent level of growth starting off in 2021, where all these kind of like big news topics are slowing down, if not completely dying down, it shows that people are sticking around for the platform itself and the features like Jasmine talked about, like topics and all the new additions they're having to keep engagement up.
Yeah, so it was something interesting. CEO Jack Dorsey had said, quote, people turn to Twitter to see and talk about what's happening, and we're helping them find their interests more quickly while making it easier to follow and participate in conversations, close quote. So it does seem as though they're becoming less of a news alert type based platform and more of a kind of, I guess more of a place where it doesn't have to be breaking news for you to be interested in it. It could just be news about things that you're interested in, like topics, things like that, but kind of a conversational interface, trying to promote a lot more kind of healthy back and forth. One of the things that stood out to me with regards to users was it's an international growth story, something we've been talking about for a while with Twitter. But again, just to reiterate, in the last 2 years, Twitter has added 10 million US users, went from 28 to 38 million. Internationally, in the last 2 years, same period, it added nearly 60 million, going from 105 to 162. So Twitter is, a lot more of an international company than maybe we give them credit for, maybe we talk about enough. Revenue highlights, folks. $900 million made in total ad revenue in Q1. That's up 32% year on year. Q1 2020 growth was dead flat, 0%. So a healthy, very healthy 32% in this Q1, just a year later. Twitter makes just over half of its money from the US region, has done for a while. US ad revenue was $464 million in Q1, up 22% in Q1. That's 4 times as fast as last Q1's 5%. So 22% this Q1, 5% growth last Q1. So a lot better. International did even better than that. Last Q1 growth was negative 5%. This Q1 plus 45. So a huge swing, negative 5 to plus 45% growth for the international portion of their revenue. Jasmine, I'll start with you again. Revenue wise, what leaps out to you?
So I think overall it was a pretty good quarter for Twitter. I mean, there were some weak points, but overall it sounds like the platform is kind of on the right track to make good on a lot of the plans that it's been laying out. And I think we also have to remember that a lot of the investments that it's made recently in its revenue products really happened in Q1. So it'll take some time for them to really just pay off. But I do want to share 2 other stats with you that stood out to me, and they were from CFO Ned Siegel on the earnings call. And he said that their advertiser base is 85% brands and 15% direct response. And it seems that that ratio is still working somewhat to Twitter's disadvantage in Q1 when you're comparing with the performance of the other social platforms, though nowhere near as dramatically as it did early on in the pandemic. And that's because some events were pushed back later into the quarter or to Q2, and brands, were kind of slower to return to advertise on Twitter because of that. But they did say that direct response is doing really well. We didn't get an exact number from it, but Siegel did say that there was accelerating growth from the 50% it reported in Q1. So that's actually really good news.
Mm-hmm. Nazmor, how about you, mate?
Like you said, Twitter has had some struggles in the past, but now it seems to be rebounding a little bit, especially on the international side. When you point out that negative growth last year, they were working on a lot of different things internationally at that point, such as their MAP program, which is supposed to help accelerate mobile apps and those kind of gaming platforms for international advertising buyers. But it had a lot of issues early on, and it took a while for them to fix all that. But in the last half of 2020, they rebuilt their advertising network and rebuilt the MAP program and have a lot more working in its favor now. And all that's led to a really good amount of growth internationally. And I believe the momentum is going to keep going forward with their new ad infrastructure. And they continue to add new products to it. So all in all, it's a good sign for me going forward. They might have some hiccups along the way, but they're investing in all the right places and they're improving.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points you mentioned, international and the improvement as well. Internationally, another international story, not just with the users I mentioned, but with revenue. David Cohen of Adweek was noting Japan, Twitter's second largest market behind the US, accounted for $170 million of Twitter's revenue. That's 16% of its total, up 30% year on year. So international revenue doing very, very good, at least in its second market. And then also you talked about improvements. I said this about Q4 as well when Twitter reported their revenue. It's true again. 32% total ad growth is their best quarterly growth that they've seen in 5 years. Last quarter, Q4 was 31%. That had been a record of the last 5 years, and now they just upped it to 32% growth. So very impressive there. Yeah, the highest since Q1 of 2016. Final note as well, I guess, net income was in the black, $68 million for the quarter. It's better than Q1's $8 million loss, last Q1's $8 million loss. But it has seen better Q1 profits, so it's still not up to the records it's seen in Q1, but a lot better than the $8 million loss it saw last year at $68 million. Talking about Q1 being a bit of a record, 32% growth, the highest it's been in 5 years' time. I want to move to their guidance and what they're expecting for Q2. So Twitter said with regards to revenue, they're expecting Q2 revenue to land between $900 million and $1.1 billion. So if we pretend it's somewhere in the middle, $1 billion, what they're expecting for Q2, that would be growth of over 70%, 70. So that would smash the records of 32 or 31 they saw the previous 2 quarters, or 15 the previous quarter before that. Granted, last Q2 was negative 23% for Twitter, so they're coming from a lower number. For user growth, they project low double-digit monetizable daily active user growth rates over the remaining 3 quarters. That would be similar to 2019's growth on average, the quarterly growth on average. 2020's quarterly growth was in the high 20-something percent range. Nazmul, what do we expect to see from Twitter on the revenue and the user side for the full year of 2021?
So in terms of what we're expecting for total Twitter revenue by the end of 2021, we're expecting around $4.7 billion in total revenue generated, which would be a 26% growth. Majority of that coming from advertising, which would represent about $4 billion of that, and that would be growing around 29%. And in terms of US, the US would have around $2.5 billion by the end of the year, representing a 25% growth, and it would be 30% growth for the US ad revenue specifically. So we're expecting them to have, as you can see, like from these growth numbers, 25 to 30%, depending on which segment, pretty high growth levels. And so their expectations are kind of in line with what we're seeing, what we're expecting to go on for the rest of these quarters, where they make stark improvements from the big downturns they had in Q2 of last year, and then to continue the momentum into Q3 and Q4, where we're not expecting the growth level to be as high, like near 70%. Who knows? Maybe they do it, but we do expect it to be like pretty positive to lead to those overall growth numbers.
So on the revenue side, are we saying it's more that they're rebounding from a low base and that's what's contributing to the high growth rates, or we're just so impressed with the initiatives and the things they're doing with the platform that's what's doing? I mean, obviously both, but which one more so?
I think for due to the size of the growth rate, it's going to be a lot more from just rebounding from a low point last year. Yep. Where like even if they didn't have that low point, if the pandemic never even happened, I think we still expect probably double digits growth for them, but maybe no in the near realm of like 70%, right? Even like the low 20s or something like that. So I think a big portion of it is coming from that rebound effect. And
for users, where do we land?
So for users, we don't track daily active users or even monetizable daily active users as they report. We're tracking monthly active users. And in that case, we're expecting globally Twitter to have by the end of 2021 around 340 million monthly active users. That will represent a growth of about 3% from the last year, which kind of puts us in line with their expectation of single-digit growth for monetizable daily active users. Of course, the monetizable number could be a little bit higher in terms of the single digits. But the way we see it, it's more that they already have this big group of monthly active users, and the monetizable daily active users are them converting those monthly active users to become more engaged on the platform, to become more frequent users, in order so they could monetize on them. Because a lot of those people who might just log into Twitter now, see 1 or 2 tweets or tweet one thing about themselves and then just, sign off and they don't have any other activity on there. They just want those people to be more engaged so that they could see a lot more ads. Mm-hmm. And then this is mentioned specifically in the US. The US would have around 55.6 million users by the end of 2021. And the US's growth is actually pretty flat from what we're expecting, only around 0.2%.
Right. That's monthly users for our numbers again.
Yep.
For the US number. All right, folks, that's all we've got time for the first half of the show. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story before the second half of the show. We'll start with Jasmine and then go to Nazmul. Jasmine, your takeaways are?
Well, really that it was a strong quarter for Twitter. It was a very strong start to the year for them, both in terms of ad revenue and in terms of users. And I look forward to seeing where it goes from here.
I think Twitter is becoming like a more interesting platform. It's not just becoming a place to go for news or get your updates about like the latest things happening around the world, but somewhere you could go to actually engage, maybe even look at the feeds, follow certain topics now. And that's exciting news as from the user perspective, but also in terms of how much more money they could generate. And we're going to get into this stuff in the other topics, but they're adding like a bunch of new stuff which could be helpful in generating a lot more revenue in the future.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that stuff now. That's all we've got time for the lead story. Time now for In Other News. First, quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, that's VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. Right, folks, we're back. Today in other news, Twitter is buying Scroll. Twitter is also preparing to roll out its first test of professional profiles, and tipping might be coming to Twitter as well. Story 1. Twitter is buying Scroll. How Scroll works. Users pay $5 a month for Scroll to get rid of ads from participating news sites. Then, Scroll takes the $5 subscription fee and shares it with the sites it took ads down from. So it's a little bit different from the ad blocking model. Now Twitter owns Scroll. It will temporarily pause new customer sign-up so it can integrate it into the social network. Sarah Fisher of Axios writes that, quote, long-term, Twitter says Scroll will become a meaningful addition to its subscriptions products, as Twitter users that subscribe to Scroll could read articles ad-free from hundreds of publishers that work with Scroll, like The Atlantic, USA Today, etc. Close quote. Twitter's VP of Product, Mike Park, also notes that, quote, as a Twitter subscriber, picture getting access to premium features where you can easily read articles from your favorite news outlet or a writer's newsletter from Review, something they just recently bought, with a portion of your subscription going to the publishers and writers creating the content, close quote. Jasmine, your thoughts on this acquisition from Twitter?
So it's just more proof that Twitter is committed to succeeding in the fight for creator attention right now. And I actually think it's really well positioned to do so. There are a ton of creators, namely journalists, writers, and thought leaders on Twitter, but they've always had to go off platform to publish their longer form content. So the Scroll acquisition plus the Review acquisition is going to help make Twitter kind of a one-stop shop for creators to publish their content, grow their audience, and earn money, which is what all creators want at the end of the day.
Speaking of creators, you're working on / finishing up a report on the creator economy?
Yes. So I have just wrapped up a report talking about all the ways that creators can make money outside of brand sponsorships and consequently what that is going to mean for influencer marketers. And it will publish on May 12th. Terrific.
Pro subscribers, check it out. If you're not a pro subscriber, shame on you. I'm just kidding. It's fine. But you can become one. Go to the website. You'll figure it out. Nazmul, what do you think?
I think this is interesting because it kind of gives us an idea of what their subscription model might look like, which they haven't really shared a lot of information as of yet, but they know, they keep touting it's going to be a big change coming to Twitter. And now I'm kind of getting the idea that it could be kind of like a Amazon Prime membership where it's not just one specific thing, but you get like a lot of benefits from being a subscriber, so to speak. One of those now with Scroll being purchased could be that you don't see any more ads on the platform, so you don't have to worry about that aspect of it. You could just scroll through it, or you just maybe just a smaller aspect. You just get access to all those articles, newsletters that are part of Scroll already, along with possibly some other features. But I think it shows that they're really investing into it, and they're trying to find what's the best way to implement it.
Great points, folks. Two quick ones from me. Peter Kafka of Recode noting that perhaps Scroll hadn't got the traction it would have liked to, and so they initially launched with a network of about 300 sites, but haven't been able to convince some of the major publishers like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal to join, despite those companies being investors in Scroll. If Scroll had lots of subscribers, they likely wouldn't have sold to Twitter. This move gives them access to over 200 million daily Twitter users worldwide and 40 million in the US. The second point here Mr. Kafka makes is that Twitter's subscription push could be a real differentiator between it and the other social media companies that make most of their money from ads. Google and Facebook haven't done much with subscription services so far, aside from Google's YouTube, which offers an ad-free service with some extra features. Story 2, Twitter is preparing to roll out its first test of professional profiles that lets brands, companies, and creators use the social network for business purposes, according to Social Media Today. Professional profiles will include an about section. There'll be room for an address, contact information, and features that help users grow their business through Twitter. Nazmul, we'll start with you. Professional profiles on Twitter. Any thoughts?
First thought is I need to make one so I can start selling my own merch through Twitter now.
He's got merch.
But on a serious note, I think this is a really good idea, and it kind of relates back to what Jasmine talked about before with influencers and getting content creators more opportunity to monetize on their platform. This lets people who would either, on the first side be like newsletter people or people who have their own side business, stuff like that, the opportunity to kind of get themselves out there on Twitter and kind of use it the same way they might use like a LinkedIn and stuff, and let people see what they do and what they're good at, and possibly get like other kind of revenue form from Twitter. It's like a start of it, of course, but it could lead to a lot more, maybe even like product and other kind of links there where people could make purchases on Twitter. But I think it's a good start.
Listeners, if you want a t-shirt with Nazmul's face on it, stand by. All right, we're working on that. Jasmine, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the first thought I had when you sent this article and I saw what it was called, it reminded me of LinkedIn just launching its creator mode, which sort of helps creators showcase their own content right at the top of their profiles. But I also think that the second part of what Nazmul said, or I guess the first part too, when he was talking about selling his own t-shirts, is that this is really an e-commerce play. We all know that e-commerce has grown massively over the course of the pandemic. Those habits are going to stick. All of the social platforms are trying to get in on that action, and Twitter is clearly not an exception.
Mm-hmm. Story 3. Tipping might be coming to Twitter. App research sorceress Jane Manchin Wong shared images recently showing that Twitter could offer a tipping button right on user profiles via a little blue or black, in some mock-ups, cash button. Apparently, tapping the button shows options to let you tip via Bandcamp, Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App, which is made by Square, whose CEO is also Jack Dorsey, same as Twitter's. Jasmine, your thoughts on tipping coming to Twitter?
Another creator monetization play. Lots of other platforms already have this. YouTube has had it for a while. Clubhouse just rolled it out. Tipping is a great supplemental revenue stream for a lot of creators, so this might help encourage them to be on the platform. I will say it's probably not a reliable source of income, and it can be a little bit awkward to ask for tips. You can ask any waiter about that, but it's definitely a way to woo more creators to Twitter.
It's always awkward when you're at a music show and they're like, we're just going to leave the tip jar at the front, and everyone's like, I probably won't. Will you judge me if I don't go to the front now and put something in? Or when they come round and put it in front of you. That's the worst, man. Oh, it's like being at the cash register and they're like, would you like to round up to donate to charity? And you're secretly thinking, I do enough for charity. But they don't know that. So you have to say, sure. Because if I don't, I'm a horrible person.
Can I tell you, it's equally awkward to refuse tips as it is to ask for tips. I used to waitress at the airport in Stockholm, and you're not allowed to accept tips. And all the American visitors would always want to tip you. And literally, you would have to stand there and argue with them so that they would not give you the tips.
Huh. I would have been like, put it in an envelope. Let's be discreet about it.
Meet
me out front in a few minutes. Oh, we'll sort this out then. Interesting. Huh. Nazmul, what do you think of tipping on Twitter?
As a former retail employee myself as well, I always love tipping. I don't know if I could work in a place that refused tipping like that. Props to you, Jasmine. but in terms of like some of the new features they added, Jasmine's absolutely right. Another play on influencers and getting content creators onto the platform and getting them some kind of revenue stream. But this is one of the ones that I think really might not work out as well in the long run. They're trying to, stick a bunch of stuff to the wall, throwing a bunch of stuff to the wall right now, seeing what kind of sticks. This is one of those things where it's kind of awkward. You're not really sure how it could be like a play on Patreon or similar to like with Twitch. People just, send money to the people that they like, that the content creators that they follow are really obsessed with. But for Twitter, it's not really that type of platform yet. It doesn't have the same kind of following or group that Twitch does, or even something like in YouTube Live and those kind of places. Maybe they could grow to add those kind of users who are really key on the people that they follow and they really want to tip. But right now, it's just another one of those features that might not play out in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are certain people where you will want to do this. I'm not sure with Twitter content, but I was thinking about like with musicians. It is often awkward, when some of the musicians you've not heard of, or you're seeing for the first time. But the people you absolutely love, funding them and keeping them going, there are a lot of people who would be passionate about that. So we'll see what comes from this. That's all we've got time for this episode. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to Jasmine.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Nazmul.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to everyone listening. Thanks to Victoria who edits the show. You guys can listen to the Behind the Numbers podcast on YouTube. Just search for Insider Intelligence. You can listen to all our episodes on the YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you're currently listening is probably where you listen, but we're also on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the others. We'll see you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, a new marketer podcast made possible by VTEX. Do you guys, when you're listening to music walking down the street, do you walk to the beat of the music?
Yes.
Okay, thanks,
Sometimes,
Victoria. Yeah. Jasmine, all right.
What else
You
would
have
you
no
do?
idea how much of a weight of my shoulders that is. Or I just find myself walking to it sometimes, and I'm like, can people tell? Am I too in step? So I try to not walk in time with it. So what's really hard is when someone else is playing music across the street and you can hear it and you're walking normally and then all of a sudden you start walking in time with the thing and you're like, oh, everyone knows now because they can hear it.
Does it matter if they know?
No, I just wonder if it looks, I just wonder. That's true. Enjoying myself. I can walk how I want to walk.